The Englund Gambit is a very tough opening to face, and I will begin by saying that I have lost to it several times. So against d4, black plays the move e5, giving up a pawn for the initiative, and if you don't know this is white, you could lose very quickly. I'm going to begin by explaining some basic ideas and showing you 4 different ways you can lose very quickly. So I'm going to show you what black is actually playing for, and then I'm going to show you theory, if you could call it that, and I'm going to show you how to play against the Englund Gambit. So first of all, when e5 is played, you don't have to take that pawn, although taking is the best move. If you do take, then white has a very pleasant advantage. The engine gives it as about +1.5. That being said, you could try some of the bad moves like c4 or d5 or e3 or knight f3. I'm going to explain why they are bad. So just don't play them as white, and if you meet them as black, you know that you have at least equality. You don't get your normal initiative that you get in the Englund Gambit, but you have a pleasant position. So white takes. What's the point? Black has several moves here. We're going to be looking at bishop c5, d6, and knight c6. Bishop c5 being the rarest of the 3 sound options, d6 being interesting, and that's what I normally face, and knight c6 the best move. Now, whichever move you play, white's going to have a huge advantage according to the engine, but there are so many traps and tricks that, you have this danger factor on your side. So let's have a look at the problems for white, the problems white could fall for first. So black simply attacks the pawn. If white doesn't do anything, then black's going to recapture the pawn. So white usually plays knight f3. Black plays queen e7, and now white once again has to defend the pawn. So both in master games and online, people play the move bishop f4. Now if you turn on the book for the lichess database, black actually wins 60% of the games here. 60% of the games. And the engine says white is winning. So why is that? Well, black has a very simple double attack here. Queen b4 check. Attacking the king and the bishop and the pawn. There is one way to defend against this. You can lose extremely quickly if you aren't careful. So first, let me show you the good move. The good move is bishop d2. Hanging the b2 pawn. Now the pawn should be taken, but really black has nothing here. So black takes the pawn, attacking the rook. And once again, there is only one good move, knight c3. After knight c3, you could say that the biggest issues have been resolved, the gambit has been unsuccessful, and white has an advantage. But let me show you the traps. Many people with white are going to try to save the rook by attacking it with the bishop, by attacking the queen with the bishop. So you, by X-ray, defend the rook and attack the queen with bishop c3, and you resign. Why is this losing for white? Well, bishop b4, the bishop is now pinned, and you have no way to defend that bishop unless you play queen d2. And if you do play queen d2, you lose all the same. Queen d2, now we take on c3, and there are no good moves here. You take with the queen, for example, queen c1 is checkmate. If you take with the knight, then I can just take your rook, and once again, black is completely winning. So that's the first trap I wanted to show you. This is actually checkmate on the board on move 8. The next one, if we go d4, e5, let's just cover all the traps in the main line first. So d takes e5, once again, knight c6, knight f3, queen e7 attacking the pawn, bishop f4 defending the pawn, and once again, queen b4 attacking the king, the bishop, and the pawn. As we said, bishop d2 is the only good move. If white plays queen d2, white is immediately losing. Why? Well, now we play queen takes b2. We are attacking the rook, and, well, there really aren't any options here. You have no way to defend your rook. If you play knight c3 or knight a3, I just take. So the only way to try and defend your rook is queen c3. So once again, by X-ray defending the rook, but now bishop b4 and the queen is lost, and you have no better move but to take the bishop. You cannot take the queen because your queen on c3 is pinned. So after queen takes b4, knight takes b4, we are now attacking the rook, we are attacking the c2 pawn with mating threats, and the position is completely busted. The next one, very similar ideas, and this is how black usually wins games. So once again, d5, knight c6, knight f3, queen e7 attacking the pawn, bishop f4 defending the pawn, queen b4, and bishop d2, the good move. Queen takes b2, and now bishop c3. If bishop c3, this is over. Bishop b4, once again, same thing. Pinning the bishop, you cannot take the queen. After bishop takes b4, knight takes b4. Now, many people, as white, are going to try to play knight bd2. I mean, the rook is attacked. There really isn't, well, there are no good moves, but some people are going to try to save the rook. If they play knight c3 or knight a3, you just take the knight. If knight bd2, then as you can see, either white loses the queen or it's checkmate. Knight takes c2. And basically, white has to give up the queen with queen takes c2. So these are the three most common traps in the main lines with knight c6. Another trap I would like to show you is in a different line. So d4, e5, d5, and bishop c5. This line is rare compared to knight c6. It's not as good, but think of it as something between the Englund Gambit and the From Gambit, where you're playing for these attacking ideas on the dark squares on the king's side. And people with white will normally play knight f3. That's a good move. d6, this pattern you will see very, very commonly. Simply trying to provoke white to take another pawn or be a full pawn up in order to improve our pieces. So e takes d6. And now this cheapo knight e7, we can see that in many, many different openings. Of course, you don't take the knight. If you take the knight, you lose your queen. So if d e7, then of course bishop takes f2. And the king is overworked. It has no options but to take the bishop on f2. And then we win the queen. So for beginners, and when I say beginners, people who play online and are below maybe 1500, the Englund Gambit is an excellent opening choice, simply because there are so many of these awful traps you could fall for, and white could fall for, and even if they don't, the opening isn't completely busted. So now, let's go over the three most common moves for black. And we are going to be playing out each of these against Nocti as white trying to defend. So normally, if you've seen any of my training videos, I will face the Englund Gambit a lot from the white side. And I usually mess those positions up because I play too defensively. So I'm going to try to play against Nocti, defending against the Englund Gambit in all three lines. First of all, before we do that, let's just have a look at the moves that decline the Gambit. So taking is best, as I said, but there are four reasonably good moves. They're all bad compared to taking, but they're playable. So first of all, let's start with d5. If white plays d5, then white has given away the center basically, and you don't get a typical Benoni type of advance. Black just plays knight f6, and it's really unclear what white should be doing. You don't have e4. I mean, you could play e4 because after knight e4 there's queen e2, but your center is so overextended that it's probably best to just play e3. And then why is this bishop here? I mean, just bishop c5, I don't know, maybe knight e2 with g3, bishop g2. Black is perfectly equal. Black isn't better or anything, but if you have a chance to be plus 1.5 as white, do not play d5. Another move that just equalizes immediately is e3. Black should just take and play d5, and of course the position is symmetrical. This is like the Petrov, basically. It's the Russian game. We have transposed to the Petrov pawn structure, or the French exchange, whatever you want to call it. Knight f3, no good because it allows e4. knight fd2, and now there are tricks. I'm going to show you one line where black plays the move e3. So this is, if e3, then of course fe3 is the best move, and now black plays bishop d6. And you can pause the video here unless you see the only move for white immediately. And I've recorded the video on the Englund Gambit recently, so you should be familiar with this. White has to play g3. If white doesn't play g3, it's almost immediately losing. If, for example, knight c3, then queen h4 check, and that's going to be checkmate. g3, the only way to save checkmate, and now queen takes, or bishop takes. Basically, you take twice, and the king is completely cut off. So this line with e3 is interesting. It's not good for black. There are better moves. d5 is better than e3, but you can try e3 because, you know, white may blunder. Once again, if white plays knight f3, go e4 and d5, or if you want to be tricky, go e4 and e3. One line that's commonly seen is c4. Once again, no good. Black takes on d4, queen takes d4, and after knight c6, white has to go back, and black's position is perfectly fine. Just as white, if you face the Englund Gambit, you have to take. Now, we are going to be looking at knight c6, d6, and bishop c5. Knight c6 is the best move for black. And I've shown you how white can lose quickly. Now let's see what happens if white knows what they are doing. So against knight c6, here is what I will do as white from now on. Knight f3, we've seen this before. Queen e7, bishop f4, we've seen this before. Everybody is going to play the move queen b4 here. Let me just show you one reason why knight c3, a very, very sensible move, isn't as good as bishop f4. It's definitely playable, but after knight e5, where you don't defend the pawn, bishop f4 takes, of course g takes because the e pawn is pinned, queen b4 now, queen d2 defending. White structure is kind of messy, and I would rather not go into this. Of course, black cannot take the pawn. If black takes the pawn, it's busted. This is an idea we know from the London system. If queen takes b2, then rook b1, queen a3 only move, followed by knight b5, and you are going to lose something. So black should continue with d6 most likely, and white is once again slightly better, but it's best to just play bishop f4. After knight f3, excuse me. So queen e7, do not go knight c3, go bishop f4. Just defend your pawn. Queen b4 check is not scary. So on queen b4 check, we've seen that queen d2 loses. Bishop d2 is the only move. Queen takes b2. Now, if black doesn't take, and black doesn't have to take, if they go queen c5 or something, then we just continue developing and we're up a pawn. So we are returning this pawn. White isn't a pawn up. So why does the engine say +2? It says +2 because white has tremendously active pieces and very easy development, and black's development has been hindered by this pawn on e5. What do you mean when you say that? Well, this bishop is going to have a hard time developing unless d6 is played, and that will take some time. So knight c3, only move. Once again, we have to save the rook. We've seen that bishop c3 loses. And now black can play several different moves. People play knight b4, but bishop b4 is better. If knight b4, this is just a cheap trick that doesn't work. Trying to attack on c2, this we just go knight d4 and the pawn has been defended. I don't know. You can try c5, misplacing this knight, but you don't have time for that. Rook b1 and you lose. If you go queen a3 here, once again, knight b5, and this is a double attack on c7 and on the queen, so that loses. So instead of knight b4, people have also tried queen a3, which is, I don't even have to say why it's bad, it just loses time and doesn't do anything. So bishop b4. Okay, at this point we have to do something because our knight is hanging. We have to get rid of that queen, so rook b1. The queen only has one square, queen a3. And now you can play knight d5, trading of bishops, or you can play rook b3. I prefer the move rook b3, and this is what I will do against the Englund from now on, just chasing the queen away. The queen usually goes to a5. The knight is now defended. And white has, again, several ways to develop. You can play e4 or e3. I like the move a3 as well, because it just forces the issue with the bishop, but you can do them in any order. Let's say e4, opening up your bishop. I don't know, knight g7, playing for knight g6. And now maybe a3, forcing a trade, or chasing the bishop back to c5, which isn't good, because if the bishop drops to c5, there is rook b5. So takes, bishop takes. And white has the bishop pair. White is going to castle in 2 moves. This bishop has many, many good squares. There is rook b5. This knight could come out to g5, and the queen could come out to h5. So it's actually white who's attacking. And white has the initiative now. White has the center. Black has these 2 weird knights, which aren't going to be doing anything unless the pawn on e5 falls, and that seems very unlikely. Even if you do play knight g6, there will be rook b5 in some positions. So knight c6, even though it's the best line for black, it just doesn't work, because the Englund Gambit doesn't work if white knows what they're doing. So I've created a theme on Nocti with all 3 key positions, d6, knight c6, and bishop c5. We're going to be playing out those positions as white against Nocti, and I've set it to rook 4, which is about 2000 FIDE. Okay, now let's try knight c6. Okay, we are playing knight f3. Nocti will be giving me immediate feedback. f6, wow, what? So pink or purple, whatever this is an excellent move. This is different to d6. I have to say I'm already surprised. Now I'm gonna take, because I don't see why I shouldn't give up my pawn. So are there any tricks if I go bishop g5? There's no bishop on c5, so there's no bishop f2, king f2, knight g4. So I'm gonna go bishop g5. Wow, Nocti is already mixing it up. h6? Interesting. I have no way to get to the light squares, so I'm guessing I should take, and go c3. I really don't want to waste time, so let's take. Wow, this is a bad move. Queen takes. Okay, c3. This is weird. I mean, you see why training against Nocti is useful. It's going to play like a human, and not necessarily a human that knows theory. Okay, the threat is g4. I like playing g3, knight h4, bishop g2. I don't want my knight on d4. But g3 creates a hook for h5, h4, but my knight defends. Okay, so let's go g3. Okay, good move, good move. Good move. If you do decide to try out Nocti, use the code hanging pawns and you will get a massive 64% discount for your first month, so it will be almost free. That way you unlock all the premium features. Okay, bishop c5, now g4 wins a pawn, so do I have to play e3? I may have to play e3. I don't see an alternative, so I'm playing e3. Now maybe I don't go bishop g2, maybe I go bishop e2 to prevent bishop g4 ideas. If d5, okay, yeah, oof, this is so strong. I have to play bishop e2. If I go bishop g2, no, wait, am I still losing? What do I do against g4? How do I defend f2 and the knight? I have no idea. What am I supposed to do? Wow. Okay, we just found a new idea in the Englund Gambit. I don't think this has ever been played. What am I supposed to do here? Bishop g2, g4 resigns. What? Bishop e2, g4 once again resigns. What am I supposed to do? I don't see a single move, so we just will not waste time. I'll play bishop e2. I know it loses to g4, but what was I supposed to do? I don't know. I really don't want to give up my knight. I think I have to give up my knight. If I go knight d4, yeah, this is incredibly bad, but I have to save my knight. Queen f2, king d2. I'm not really threatening rook f1 at all. Wow, I'm resigning. This is Nocti destroyed me. Now, let us switch our attention to bishop c5. Bishop c5 is a tricky move that goes for those ideas with knight e7 and that cheap trick to win the queen. Again, if white is careful, then they don't work. There are a couple of moves white could play here. Knight f3 is the most common, but I think knight c3 is the best move. Knight f3, once again, d6, e takes d6, you just take. And on knight e7, do not lose your queen. Just don't take that knight. Instead, I found a very good setup for white, b3. And it's not clear what black should be doing. Let's say bishop d6, for example. Bishop b2. How do you defend the g7 pawn? I don't know. The engine doesn't defend it. Well, one of the best moves is castles, but it also gives knight bc6. And after castles, we can just go queen d4, provoking f6, or knight f5. So after f6, knight c3, we just continue developing. We're up a pawn, our bishop on b2 is a monster, we can castle queenside, we can go e4. I just love this position. However, I also think knight c3 is better than knight f3, because we speed up our queenside development, and this pawn doesn't need defending after bishop c5. So black will once again go d6. We can go knight f3. And now, if black tries that weird knight e7 trick at some point now, let's say knight c6, ed6, knight e7, now it doesn't work because the queen is defended. So after ed6, bishop d6 should be played. But now we have this annoying move, knight b5. And this is the reason I prefer knight c3. Firstly, it defends the queen, and it runs away from all of those tricks with bishop takes f2, which is the reason black plays bishop c5 in the first place on lower levels. And secondly, once d6 is played, after ed6, bishop d6 runs into this queen trade, or we take the bishop. So for example, after knight f6 we take, and if black takes with the queen, we trade everything, we're up a pawn. If black takes with the pawn, there is no counterplay. It doesn't exist. So that's bishop c5. I think no one with black should play this unless their opponent is lower than 1500. Now let's try bishop c5. Let's see how we do against that. So against bishop c5, I like the move knight c3. Let's do that first. Knight c6, okay, makes sense. Knight f3. If d6 we take, okay, knight e7, interesting. Playing for knight g6. So let's go bishop f4, defending the pawn. Knight g6, bishop g3. Castle's kingside? That's surprising. I think I can just develop normally now. Yeah, Nocti destroyed me in the last one. Oh, okay. This is actually pretty standard in the Albin, I think, where you go knight g6, castle kingside, and rook e8. I do have queen d5, though. Maybe I leave my bishop here. Maybe I do leave my bishop here. So let's go bishop b4. This is an idea I know from some lines of the Englund Gambit. Obviously, it doesn't work here. Oh, d6, that's a great move. As you can see, Nocti is punishing me. Can I get away with knight e4? Knight e4, bishop b6. Takes on d6, seems good. Knight e4, knight f4, ef4, d5, knight c5. Okay, I like knight e4. Wait, a blunder? No, it's okay. Okay, do we take on? No, we don't take on c5. So now they have to save the bishop. If I take on e5 now, on d6 now, am I losing to rook e8? Probably. Very likely. But for now, e5 is defended, so we can castle. Okay, this is a very interesting attempt by Nocti once again. This is why I play out all the positions I'm trying to learn against Nocti. Instead of just studying theory, you can play out the variations you're trying to learn and the specific openings you're trying to learn against a human-like AI That way, first of all, you get immediate feedback. Secondly, you get to train and transfer theoretical knowledge into a skill straight away. Okay, I mean, 2 knights for 2 bishops and a slightly better structure. I'm going to call this equal. Now the move I normally face. I don't know why, but people seem to play d6 against me in every Englund Gambit game. There are 2 ways to play this. Normally, in all of my games, I would take the pawn, and I would still take that pawn. So takes. Bishop takes. Knight c3 is the best move. I used to play knight f3, and on knight c6, I would almost always go bishop g5, and that's fine. If knight f6, there are no problems. If f6, then you have to move your bishop again. And what black is doing here, black is playing for quick queenside development and queenside castling. So bishop g4, e3, this is how most of my games would go. Queen e7, freeing up castling, maybe bishop e2 or c3, I've also played that. Bishop e2, castles queenside. And now I would be in a position where I have to play something weird like queen c1 or knight bd2, I don't know. And this position is dead even. White's position is okay, of course white is up a pawn, but black has very, very good pieces. So I'm no longer going to be doing that. And if you play the Englund Gambit, you should be happy when you get this, because you have more than enough compensation for the pawn. What should white do? Well, white should, in my opinion, after having studied this for a while, play the move knight c3 and copy black. Knight c3 gives you the option to castle queenside. Black's idea in the Englund is to overwhelm you with quick development, with the initiative, and good attacking chances. But if you castle on the same side, that's not going to happen. So knight c6, let's say black does the same thing. Knight f3, bishop g4, standard, bishop g5, once again, f6. Now, instead of bishop h4, first of all, if bishop g4 isn't played, then we don't have that many issues to solve because black isn't castling queenside quickly. We don't play bishop h4, we play bishop e3. Now this knight is tied down in the event of queenside castling. So let's say queen e7, h3, let's chase that bishop away, bishop h5. You don't have to throw in h3, but this is just my analysis of the best way to play. Queen d3, castles queenside and castles queenside. There are no good discoveries for black. This bishop seems good, but it's not that good. I don't know what you can even try. Let's say bishop b4. I can play queen f5 check. I always have queen f5 and this bishop is hanging. Another reason to throw in h3 to make sure that your queen has this f5 square. So if black plays the move d6, I would recommend that you take this as white and copy what black is doing. Do not castle kingside. Just try to go queenside as quickly as you can. Now let's just look at an alternative. If white plays knight f3 and you play the Englund Gambit, then you should not take this pawn going for a queen trade. Go knight c6. And this basically provokes e d6 transposing to the same line. Bishop d6, knight c3, and just bishop g4, bishop g5, same line. The reason I keep playing this move bishop g5 with white is because I want to free up space for queenside castles. d6. Okay, this is what I normally face. So against d6, let's take. Bishop takes. Okay, fine. Knight c3. Queen e7? Before developing the knight? Alright, I'm still going knight f3. I want to go bishop g5 if allowed. Yes. Now, there is no f6, so Nocti hasn't played the critical line. Bishop b4. I want to go queen d3 here. I want to go queen d3 and castle queenside. Is that bad? Queen d3 castles kingside, castles queenside, rook d8, queen c4, rook d1, knight d1. I'm not too convinced. Let's go queen d3 anyway. I don't think castling kingside is a good option here. h6. Okay, I'm not giving away that bishop. Definitely not. I like the pin. Okay. Now castles kingside rook d8 is slightly risky because the king is completely exposed. Knight e5, not a big deal. So let's castle queenside. Okay, king b1, I have to defend my pawn. No, I blundered? How is this a blunder? Ah! Oh, okay, I'm resigning. Ah, I should have taken more time. Okay, so this, I think, wasn't a critical line. I think white is better. I just blundered my rook now. So yeah. But you can see why Nocti is a useful sparring partner. Let's go back to the video. So all in all, the Englund Gambit is a bad opening. We have to say that. If white knows what they're doing, white will be up between 1 and 2 according to the engine, with very few tricks for black. However, as you've seen, there are so many traps white could fall into that the surprise factor and the danger level of this opening justifies playing it at least online. Thank you for watching, let me know what you think, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.